This is your radio Bible teacher, Dr. David Depew, welcoming you to the Seed of Abraham program, where we take time to again consider the greatness and faithfulness of God. We are continuing in our series called The Fullness of Time, and this is based on the Greek word pleroma, which is used in the New Testament in several places, but in particular in the book of Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4 is the portion that we're particularly interested, where it says that it was in the fullness of time that God sent forth his Son, born of a woman born under the law. Now this is a little word in the original language, the fullness, and it's something that many people skip over and they don't realize it. But there are so many things that went into the preparations for the coming of Jesus Christ, and we're looking at those and seeing how the political stage was set, the military situation was just so, the religious situation, and we're looking at those, and we're taking a few programs to do that. Now, one of the things that some people have a question about is, would God ever use a heathen man to bring about God's plans? And is it possible also for a human being to actually be the representative of God on earth? These questions would come to the mind of serious religious people of the Hebrews, particularly in the time of about 550 BC, when Cyrus, the Persian emperor, was ruling in Persia. And he was considered by his followers to be the representative of the god Marduk on earth. And it's interesting, although this man was heathen, yet God used him and made the result come out to be very blessed. For the ancient Israelites, God even said in the book of Isaiah, approximately 200 years or so before this, God said, Cyrus, he is my shepherd. And it's interesting to note that this is in Isaiah chapter 44, and from what the archaeologists have dug, and I've actually seen this in the museum, is called the Cyrus cylinder. And actually there are more than one of these that Cyrus had made and sent around his empire, and in that he told how he was very tolerant of other people's religions. And at this time when he was ruling from 550 to 530 BC, of course, there were many Jewish captives in his area, in his kingdom, and he allowed them to go back to Jerusalem for the rebuilding of the city and the rebuilding of the temple. And in this, what's called a Cyrus cylinder, it's something that was made out of clay. It's a few inches long, perhaps about 1/3 of a meter in length. It tells on there how he allowed the various captives that were in his kingdom to go back and reinstitute the religion that they had, and he even helped them to build their temples and so on. And one of those that he helped was the one that was rebuilt then in Jerusalem. Now it's interesting to note that Jesus declared that he himself, that Jesus was the good shepherd. And we read about that in John chapter 10, verse 11. And here we see one instance of where God used someone who was heathen, and he used them for his own good purposes that God wanted. Then we come down to the next important ruler was Darius, the Persian king. And we again wonder, well, is it proper for someone to be the representative of God on earth? And certainly devout religious people would be thinking about that. Darius claimed to be the representative of the god Marduk, and then he also claimed to be the representative of Amun-Re, the god of Egypt, and he was the defender of the Persian god of light, Ahura Mazda. Now, it's rather interesting that he had to defend his god. It seems to me that if you have a god that you have to defend, you may be worshiping the wrong god. The God that we worship the supreme God, the one with all power and authority, the ruler, the most powerful being in all of the universe, we do not have to defend him. He defends himself. We may want to speak out for our faith. We need to tell what we believe and give the scriptural authority as to why we believe those things. But it's not that we have to defend God, because God defends himself. But this man Darius, the ancient Persian that ruled from 522 to 486, thought that he had to defend the Persian god of light. Of course, we recall that Jesus came, and in John chapter 9, he said, "I am the light of the world." Certainly we thank him for that he's the light who gives us spiritual insight. He's the one that illuminates our minds and our hearts with the true light. At this same time, or about this time, the Babylonian goddess Ishtar was assimilated, went into the Persian religion, and the priests were called the Magi. And of course, if you studied the history of the Bible, you may recall that the Magi was the name of the people who came and saw the star, and they came to worship the baby Jesus. Now, it's very interesting about these Magi because they were Persian. At least there was a particular sect or group of priestly tribe in the 600s BC was when it was going. We know it was in the area of Media, and they had an importance of, they said, of fire and water and earth and air. They had a perpetual flame that was burning, and they claimed that it was started from heaven. Perhaps a lightning strike of lightning had hit something and had started a fire, and they kept this fire burning. They felt this was important. These people had blood sacrifices of domestic animals, different types of clean domestic animals that they used. They wore long white robes and hats that were shaped in cone, like a cone, and these were made out of felt, F-E-L-T, and they had long side flaps that came down over their ears and their cheeks. They didn't have any personal gods, and they did not have any images. They didn't seem to have any particularly important theology, and so Zoroastrianism started in the 500s of BC, and Zoroastrianism became the Persian religion and was established by Darius the Great. But these people were even more interesting because the two countries, this Persia and the ancient Israelites, the courses of their nations had been closely related from ancient times. For one thing, we can know that when Babylon was conquered by the Persians, that there were Israelite captives who were in Babylon at that time. And that was in 539 BC on October the 12th when that occurred. And then after that, both of the nations were conquered by Alexander the Great, and then both were conquered by the Seleucid dynasty, the Seleucid king that came along after Alexander the Great, one of his great generals under him. And then they both got their independence. The ancient Israelites got theirs under the Maccabees, who threw out the Seleucid dynasty and cleansed the temple, and the Persians got theirs under the Parthian emperor, and so this gave them the freedom again. So it was interesting to see this. And then their courses were even more intertwined, and an interesting thing happened because in 247, these Magi, who later came, the same group of people, in 247 BC, they were priests, but they also became officials of the government of Parthia, and they were the ones who chose the king there in Parthia. And so we see that this was something interesting, and then there were battles between these Parthians and the Roman Empire. I won't go into all of these, but there was one in 55 BC, and there was another one in 40 BC, another one in 37 BC when they fought each other. And so we see that these people knew each other very well, the Romans and the Parthians. And then it came down to the time when King Herod, and we read about him, of course, in the New Testament at the time of the birth of Jesus, he had received from Julius Caesar, he asked for it and paid for it, he received the title King of the Jews. But he had to come, and he had a 3-year war, 3 years and 5 months, in order to capture Jerusalem and then claim that he was king of all of these people. So when these Magi came, who were the ones who chose the king, and we have to tell about this a little more in our next program, you can see where he knew them very well. These people had been ancient enemies, and yet they were coming and asking who was the new one, who was the one who was born to be the king of the Jews. So these were long-time old enemies of his, and plus they came, and it was sort of insulting to him, he would think, to ask who was going to be the next king. When he was the king, he had murdered people to become the king, he paid money to become the king, and now this is happening to him. So it's an interesting thing. We're seeing how the stage is set for Jesus to come exactly in the fullness of time, when he should come and when it was appropriate. This is your radio Bible teacher, Dr. David Depew, inviting you to listen in again next time to The Seed of Abraham. You can write to us at The Seed of Abraham, Post Office Box 842, that's Box 842, Alhambra, Alhambra, California, 91802, that is 91802, USA. Goodbye for now, and may God bless you as you study His Word.